The fight against Bill 96 has finally arrived in court. The Task Force on Linguistic Policy's challenge against Bill 96 begins today, and they say that the hearing is just the beginning of a journey that will likely end up at the Supreme Court of Canada. Let's go now to Andrew Caddell, president of the Task Force on Linguistic Policy. Andrew, welcome back to the show.
Good morning, Elias. Great to talk to you.
Okay, tell me about the start of this journey. What is going to happen today? Take us through it.
Well, it'll be pretty well a formality because it'll be a meeting between our lawyers, Michael Bergman and his associates, and the Attorney Generals of Quebec and the Attorney General of Canada. And because we're taking on both attorneys general, and they have at least three lawyers each that are registered for the case. It'll be interesting to see how many show up. Okay, so tell me about that. Well, tell me about why you're the Canadian aspect of things, the Quebec aspect of things. Tell me about your full-fledged attack, your plan of attack. Well, the plan originally was and has been to represent individuals. There are other cases that deal with some technicalities of Bill 96 and the notwithstanding clause and the use of the notwithstanding clause in some of the legislation. And those are challenges that the Quebec government will have to face. In our case, there are people whose lives are really very much affected. There's a woman who has an autoimmune disease and can't get information from healthcare in English, and she's a permanent resident, so she's not an historic Anglophone. There's a child who is autistic and who can't get treatment for autism in English. There's a teacher who's concerned about the future of education, and as you know, time to go back to school, we have to think about what's the future of the educational system for English-speaking people in Quebec. So all of those things affect real people as individuals, and that's why we've taken these cases. So the cases that will appear, the file that would be filed presented today, will then establish a calendar which will probably take us into June of 2024 for an initial for a deadline of submission of documentation and possibly trial in the fall of 2024. Okay, and obviously you're one of the things here is that you're saying is that the Quebec government has erred with Bill 96. Are you also saying that the federal government has erred with how they've handled it? Well, there's two things. The Quebec government has tried to put through a constitutional amendment which says that Quebec is a nation and that and also that Quebec is a French-speaking, exclusively French-speaking nation. Well, the Constitution of Canada says that English and French shall be used in the courts and in the legislature and in the documentation that follows. So this would make a significant change, and it would. It's something that is definitely unconstitutional. That all the other elements of Bill 96 that are egregious, obviously, we're taking on. But certainly that section, the government of Canada has refused to defend the Constitution, and therefore we're taking them on because we're saying, you're not doing your due diligence, your duty to defend the Constitution, and therefore we're having to take you to court as well. And we shouldn't be, because the Quebec government should not be passing laws like Bill 96, but the government of Canada should not be allowing constitutional amendments or even changes to laws such as this that are clearly unconstitutional. Well, and Andrew, I may not agree with Bill 96, but I understand why the Quebec government tries to pass laws like Bill 96. When it comes to the federal government, real head scratcher here, how they could sort of just stand in the background and not deal with this. What's your take on that? Why do you think the federal government hasn't been standing up for Anglos? Well, let's face it. They read the tea leaves, they read the polls, and they know that the Quebec government is very popular, and François Legault is sort of a Teflon man, and therefore they don't want to take him on or take on the government of Quebec at a time when they could be going to the polls and the Bloc Québécois could sweep up all of those anti-liberal votes that might result if the Trudeau government decided to defend the Constitution. It's all politics. Andrew, I've got a listener here sending me a message here saying notwithstanding clause, right? So Can we just talk about that? Because I think some people believe
that notwithstanding clause means complete total protection no matter what to any type of law. It's not the case here. So tell me about how you can go to court on this, even if the Quebec government has preemptively used the notwithstanding clause.
Well, our brief is quite brilliant. First of all, it points out that only sections 2 to 7 and 15 of the Charter are affected by the notwithstanding clause. I mean, they are very important because they're the individual rights and human rights sections. But that said, there's a whole panoply of law and the history of law that goes back all the way to the Magna Carta that preceded the Charter in 1982. And therefore, we're arguing that there's so many things that are wrong about Bill 96. And then, of course, the sections that are unconstitutional. We're dealing with Section 133, which is English and French. There's Section 23, which is English education. There's all sorts of sections that deal with individual rights or for example, the rights of women that are not affected by the notwithstanding clause. So it only affects a certain portion, an important portion, but it doesn't affect the entire Constitution.
Andrew, I know people who are opposed to Bill 96. We want results as soon as possible. Like waiting and the legal process. Sometimes we feel it takes too long. Can you take us through when we would start to see, if you're successful here, when would we start to see rulings that could be counted as wins?
Well, the Blakey case in 1977 ended up in the Supreme Court in 1979. That was, in a day when there weren't as many cases before the Supreme Court, and it was really kind of fast-tracked. In this case, there's about 5 or 6 cases that are before the courts, some in different stages. So our case, I would imagine, and I'm just guessing here, probably if we have the actual trial next fall, then it would probably be sometime maybe about 4 or 5 months at the very least before a judgment. Then it would go to the appeal court if Quebec decides to appeal, which of course they've got tons of our money to spend on these things, so they will. And then it would go to appeal. The appeal would be on the law itself and the errors in law. And then, or it would be to support our appeal. So, and then after that, go to the Supreme Court. I would think at the very least 3 years. It would be nice if the federal government would make a reference, but even if it were to make a reference, we don't know where they stand. So we have to fight this out all the way because we don't know if the federal government will be our allies or our opponents.
Okay,
which is kind of ironic.
This is the most important, most fascinating part of this, right? So what do you think will happen there, right? Because the lawyers for the federal government, well, they're gonna have to put up an argument. And do you have any inclination as to where the lawyers for the federal government, where they will go? I'm not a lawyer, and I would be very reluctant to speculate. I think that's the sort of thing that we'll watch and see and let it play out. And of course, the direction will come from the Attorney General, and it will also come from the lawyers and their analysis. Mm-hmm. But I would hope that the politicians out there are listening to us and thinking this is a bit crazy when the federal government has to oppose its own constitution. And it's almost put up or shut up time for the federal government, because I think about all the hemming and hawing and the explanations as to why they've stayed on the sidelines. Now they're forced, right? They don't have a choice anymore. They cannot avoid the issue, correct?
Yep. The cat's among the pigeons, as Pierre Trudeau used to say.
Andrew, to wrap up here, is there anything else that we haven't discussed yet that we should discuss for today that our listeners should know?
I just think that, people should recognize that, the Constitution is there to protect the rights of individuals. We have a Charter of Rights, have protections that go back, as I say, to Magna Carta. We live in a society that's based on the rule of law, and I think that both the Quebec government and the federal government have to understand that.
Andrew, we will be watching, and we'll catch up again real soon.
Thanks so much.
Andrew Caddell is president of the Task Force on Linguistic Policy.